How Much Land Does a Man Need? By Leo Tolstoy. An older sister from the town visited her younger sister in the countryside. The older sister was married to a merchant, while the younger sister was married to a peasant. They sat together, drinking tea and chatting. The older sister boasted about her comfortable town life, her well-dressed children, delicious food and drinks, and the pleasures of going around and attending the theater. This annoyed the younger sister, who began criticizing town life and praising the simplicity of country life. "I wouldn't trade my life for yours," the younger sister said. "Our life may be dull, but it is carefree. You may live in luxury, but wealth can disappear in an instant. There's a saying that gain has a big brother, called loss. Today you may be rich, but tomorrow you may be begging for bread. Our rustic life may not be rich, but we always have enough." The elder sister retorted, "Enough? You share your life with oxen and swine. You have no elegance or comfort. No matter how hard your husband works, you will always live and die in poverty, and your children after you." "Yes, that's true," replied the younger sister. "We understand the realities of our life. But our life is as solid as the rock beneath our feet. We don't bow down to anyone. We fear no one. Whereas you townsfolk are constantly facing obstacles. Today everything may seem fine, but tomorrow temptation may come your way, whether it's through gambling, drinking, or theft, and poof, your wealth turns to dust and ashes. You can't deny it." Packham, the younger sister's husband, was lying on top of the stove, listening to the conversation. He thought to himself, "That's absolutely true. Because I have worked the land since I was a child, I haven't had time for nonsense. The only problem is that land is scarce. If only I had enough land, I would fear no one, not even the devil himself." The women finished their tea, continued gossiping about their daily lives for a while, cleared the tea things, and went to sleep. Unbeknownst to them, the devil had been sitting behind the stove the entire time, listening to everything. He was delighted that the peasant's wife had provoked her husband into bragging about how the devil himself couldn't harm him if he had enough land. "Easy, easy," he thought. "I'll get even with you. I will give you plenty of land, and both you and your land shall be mine." Near the peasant's village lived a small landowner, a lady, who owned 120 acres of land. Initially, she had a good relationship with the peasants and treated them leniently. However, when she hired an overseer, a retired soldier, he made life unbearable for the peasants. No matter how careful Packham was, his horses would wander into the oats, his cow would break fences, or his calf would graze in the meadows, resulting in fines. Packham was furious and repeatedly scolded and beat his workers because of the overseer's actions. Throughout the year, he suffered greatly due to the overseer. When winter came, he was relieved to confine his cattle to his yard, even though feeding them was challenging. During the winter, rumors spread that the landowner was planning to sell her land, and the overseer intended to buy it. The peasants were terrified, thinking that if the steward obtained the land, he would impose even harsher fines. They depended on the land for their livelihood and felt trapped. So, they approached the landowner as a group and pleaded with her not to sell to the steward, but to sell it to them instead, promising to pay more than he would. The landowner agreed. However, when the peasants tried to buy the land collectively through their communal council, they faced difficulties. The influence of an evil spirit prevented them from reaching an agreement. Eventually, they decided to buy the land individually in separate lots. The landowner agreed to this arrangement as well. Packham became envious when he learned that his neighbor had bought 20 acres from the landowner, paying half up front and having a year to pay off the rest. He realized that everyone was acquiring land, and he didn't want to be left out. He discussed it with his wife, and they resolved to buy at least 10 acres. They had saved 100 rubles, 10 pounds, sold their horse and half of their bees, and sent their son into service to gather the required funds. Packham chose 15 acres with a small copse, a plot he had desired for a long time, and negotiated with the landowner. He successfully secured the 15 acres on his terms, confirmed the deal with a handshake, and paid a deposit. He then completed the purchase in town, paying half the money up front, agreeing to pay off the rest in 2 years, and finally, he was left alone with his land. He borrowed some additional money from his brother-in-law, bought seeds, and successfully cultivated the land. Within a year, he repaid both the landowner and his brother-in-law. Packham was now a landowner himself. He plowed and sowed his own land, harvested hay, cut firewood, and grazed his cattle. Whenever he walked on his land, he felt a sense of pride and joy. The grass and flowers seemed different to him now. Previously, his plot of land was just like any other, but now it was something entirely special to him. Packham enjoyed his life, except for the constant trespassing on his crops and pastures by the peasants. He tried to reason with them, but they ignored his pleas. Eventually, he took them to court and got them fined. However, the situation worsened, and they started vandalizing his property. Packham suspected Simeon as the culprit and confronted him, but they ended up in a dispute. They went to court, but due to lack of evidence, Simeon was acquitted, infuriating Packham even more. He quarreled not only with his neighbors, but also with the magistrates. Packham became isolated in his community, but he heard rumors of people seeking new lands. He saw an opportunity to expand his own land by acquiring the abandoned plots. A passing peasant informed him about fertile lands in the south, where people were settling and receiving generous allocations of land. Intrigued, Packham decided to investigate. He traveled to the region, confirmed the favorable conditions, and made up his mind to sell his farm and move there with his family. In the following spring, he sold all his belongings and relocated to the new settlement. Packham arrived at the new settlement with his family, and his name was duly recorded in the roll of the largest village in the local commune. He celebrated his arrival by hosting a feast for the village elders and presented all the necessary legal documents, which were found to be in order. The community welcomed Packham and allotted him land for his family, consisting of 50 acres spread across different fields, along with the right to graze his cattle on the communal lands. With great enthusiasm, Packham built his house and invested in acquiring a substantial number of cattle. His new plot of land was twice the size of his previous one and exceedingly fertile, allowing him to live a far more prosperous life than before. The abundance of arable and grazing land meant he could keep as many cattle as he desired. Initially, as Packham constructed his house and expanded his livestock, he was content with his circumstances. However, as time passed, he began to feel constrained in the settlement. Like the other villagers, he desired to cultivate Turkish wheat, but the communal domains had limited suitable land for this purpose. They resorted to sowing wheat in grassy areas or fallow land, leaving it uncultivated for 2 years until it became overgrown with grass again. Although there was an abundance of light soil, it was only suitable for growing rye, not wheat, which requires richer soil. Many villagers sought fertile soil, but not everyone could obtain it, leading to disputes. The wealthier peasants held tightly to their acquired land, while the poorer ones were compelled to sell theirs to pay their taxes. In the first year, Packham successfully sowed his assigned land with wheat, resulting in a good harvest. This success fueled his ambition to sow even more wheat, but the available land for wheat cultivation was limited and of poor quality. He yearned for more land and decided to approach a merchant to rent additional land for a year. With his increased allocation, Packham sowed a significantly larger amount of wheat, which yielded another successful harvest. However, this new field was situated a considerable distance from the village, 15 miles away. As Packham traveled to and from the field, he observed prosperous merchant peasants living on their own farms and thought to himself, that's the kind of trade I should be engaged in. If only I could purchase a small estate outright and establish my own farm, I would be truly content. And so, Packham began pondering how he could acquire an estate of his own. Over the course of 5 years, Packham continued to rent more land and sow increasing amounts of wheat. The years passed favorably, with bountiful wheat crops enabling him to accumulate wealth. However, there was a persistent annoyance in Packham's life, the need to rent land annually from others, which required time-consuming searches. Whenever there was slightly better land available, the local peasants would flock to claim and divide it amongst themselves. If Packham delayed in securing land, there would be none left for him to sow. On one occasion, he even rented half of the communal pasturages from merchants and plowed them up, but the other peasants filed a lawsuit against him, leading to the termination of the arrangement. If the land had been his own, nobody would have interfered, and there would have been no opposition. While Packham contemplated where he could purchase land outright, he encountered a peasant who possessed 500 acres of land but had fallen into financial ruin and was selling it at a remarkably low price. Packham engaged in negotiations, and after extensive haggling, they settled on a price of 1,000 rubles, £100, with half to be paid up front. However, their negotiations were momentarily interrupted when a passing merchant stopped at Packham's farm to rest his horses. They engaged in conversation and enjoyed a cup of tea together. The merchant mentioned that he had recently traveled to the land of the Bashkirs, where he purchased 5,000 acres of land from them for just 1,000 rubles. Intrigued, Packham inquired further, and the merchant shared his experience. You simply need to win over their chiefs, the merchant explained. I offered them dressing gowns, carpets, a chest of tea, and shared wine with those who preferred it. In return, I acquired land at a rate of 20 kopecks, 5d. per acre, a vast expanse of land near the river, covered in steppe grass. Packham's curiosity grew, prompting him to ask more questions. The land there, the merchant continued, is so extensive that even if you spend a whole year traveling across it, you would not cover it all. And it all belongs to the Bashkirs. They are a simple people, akin to sheep. It's possible you might even receive some land for free. Packham pondered this information, realizing that with the same sum of money, he could pursue his desires without burdening himself with debt. Packham asked for directions and prepared for his journey after the merchant left. Leaving his wife behind, he took a laborer and set off. They traveled 500 miles until they reached the land of the nomadic Bashkirs. The story makes clear that no matter how much land Packham acquires, it is never enough to satisfy his bottomless appetite. His greed continues to grow without limit, setting in motion the tragic events to come.